Almost every decision we make in our lives depends on what we think is going to happen with prices tomorrow, in a week from now, in a month, in a year, in 10 years. How much to consume, how much to invest, how much we want to have to demand in wages, and how we want to set prices. It all depends on what we think is going to happen with prices in the future. And not surprisingly, macroeconomists have long appreciated the importance of inflation expectations for aggregate dynamics. In fact, some of the most important breakthroughs in macroeconomics theory were about how to incorporate inflation expectations in our models so we can have a better understanding of the data and also we can develop better policies. Recently, central banks embraced the idea that by managing inflation expectations, you can actually achieve better macroeconomic outcomes. In a nutshell, if you monitor and manage inflation expectations, you can detect early signs of rising inflation and you can respond to those early signals before inflation gets out of control. And consistent with these policies, we see that central banks have been tremendously successful in stabilizing inflation, making sure it's at low and stable levels since the 1980s. This is obviously a huge success story that central banks have been so successful in making inflation low and stable, but there is an irony in this. By making inflation so boring, so to say, people stop paying attention to inflation, to central banks. Indeed, if every year, year after year, inflation is 2%, why should we care about inflation? In some sense, it's a sign of great success. People don't worry about inflation, but it also creates new kinds of challenges. For example, you want to raise inflation expectations because you're worried that the economy may be depressed, and people are not paying attention to you when you're a central bank. Then the key question is, how can you raise inflation expectations when people are not listening to you? Suppose you want to see what is the relationship between expectations and consumer choices. In principle, it sounds very easy. We have data on expectations, we have data on consumption choices, we can run a regression, and we can claim this is a causal relationship from expectations to consumption choices. But in reality, it's much more complicated. We don't know what people know, we don't know how they interpret the facts, and so it's really hard for us to rationalize their choices even if we see expectations. To make sense of what we see in the data, we have to really dig deeper and run what we call randomized controlled trials. We have some early evidence from these experiments when you randomize provision of information and you see how people change their beliefs, how they change their choices. I think the two most important lessons are the following. First, when you give people information, they revise their beliefs in light of what you tell them. But the trick here is that you have to tell this information in a simple, tractable way. So, the current central bank communication is way too difficult for a regular American or a regular European. It has to be much more accessible to the general public. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two, we see that once you change expectations of people, they're also going to change their behavior. They're going to change their consumption, they're going to change their employment, they're going to change their investment. But what is key here is that the reaction of these economic agents may be context dependent. You can stimulate consumption or you can actually cut consumption. And so what is key here for policymakers is that they have to present this information in a particular way such that what they tell people is going to shape their reactions. In a sense, inflation expectations as a policy tool is still not there yet. We need to iron out many wrinkles in our understanding of how expectations work and how policymakers can use them.